welcome to another episode of the Symphonic podcast. My name is Bernardo Miethe, and with me as always is Andrew Owen.
Hello.
So before we begin, we wanted to talk a little bit of business. We have now 14 subscribers, so we have 4 more than last week. It's growing slowly. So for those of you that are listening on iTunes, we recommend, if you can, to check out our video podcast on YouTube. Just search for Symphonic Podcast on YouTube, because we put a lot of images in there, and we actually put some music too. So if you know how to read music, you can check it out too.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, it's all good. We don't hate you. We love you anyways. And I mean, that's how I listen to podcasts anyways. I listen when I'm driving or
Yeah, video podcasts aren't as useful when you're driving.
That's true.
Not that it stops many of us. I mean, they say a quarter of people are on Facebook as they're driving. I just think that's wonderful.
Yep. All right.
Death and destruction.
So today we're going to be talking about Vaughan Williams, and more specifically his Symphony Number 5. I always have problems with his last name, because it's written, I mean, me as a Spanish speaker, when I see his name, I want to say Vaughan Williams or something, and I know it's Vaughan Williams.
See, we English speakers have the most trouble with his first name.
Ralph?
Rafe.
Rafe.
That's how we pronounce it. Rafe Vaughan Williams.
Funny.
Rafe Vaughan Williams.
Vaughan Williams. One interesting thing about his music is that it's described as human, whatever that means. I mean, that's what I've been reading this week, is that it's described as human.
He was one of our first human composers. Prior to him, we had only non-human composers.
A bunch of cyborgs and...
Cyborgs, and just, it's complicated, but we have the doctor to thank for solving all of these problems.
One thing that I think why his music is described as human is because he's trying to connect with the English, his English heritage. He's trying to go back to 16th century English music, as well as using folk songs and stuff like that. One thing that I always I always think of when I hear Vaughan Williams is, for some reason, is Celtic music. And every time I hear Celtic music, for some reason, I think of Vaughan Williams. Those two are connected in my mind. Of course, that's my personal opinion, but it's just something that I always, for some reason, hear.
Just sounds like home. Just pleasant.
It's very pleasant. Okay, so Vaughan Williams was our quick introduction. He was one of the leaders, with Holst and other English composers, of the 20th century revival of English music, thanks to Edward Elgar. Vaughan Williams was interested in the revival of 16th century English composers, and he also collected English folk songs. He served from 1914 to 1918 in the war, and although he was way over the military age, he still served. And after the war, he was active in every phase of English music, as composer and conductor, especially of choral festivals.
Sure. I mean, Vaughan Williams was before Elgar and after Purcell, not a whole lot going on in England in terms of music. So he's one of the people that helped to revive the English musical tradition. So Vaughan Williams' music is very particular to him. It's individual. It's a kind of when you hear Vaughan Williams' music, you know it's Vaughan Williams. Yeah. There's just something very distinct about it. Mm-hmm. One of those things that makes it distinct is that Vaughan Williams frequently uses what are called modal harmonies. Mm-hmm. Typically when we have music, it's either major or minor. Vaughan Williams uses some scales that aren't major or minor. Mm-hmm. Just something's a little changed. But it's something that's native to folk music, something that we expect to see in a lot of the music of English folk music, for sure. So you see that a lot in his music for orchestra and for other genres, other ensembles. There's some French influence from Ravel and Debussy.
Definitely.
We cannot deny that. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of, he, like many composers, is just synthesizing his experience around him. He wrote for almost every genre. He wrote operas, symphonies, he wrote choral works, both easy and hard choral works for professional large ensembles and choral works for amateur ensembles. He wrote lots of things for neglected instruments like the harmonica or the tuba or the pipes. Mm-hmm. And by pipes, I suppose, I mean, that's what that's called in the piece, but Those things tend to be things like penny whistles and
Recorders.
I mean, English-sounding instruments like pipes. You just hear it and that sounds awfully Celtic, doesn't it? Even though the Celts and the Angles are not even that related. They just happen to be sharing an island. So his belief was that the composer should, quote, make his art an expression of the whole life of the community, unquote. So even though he has this emphasis on music being a communal thing, on it being really accessible, he is a very distinct composer. He is an individual composer.
One thing that if you want to know more about Ravel and Debussy, go back to our second episode, which we talk a lot about Impressionism, French Impressionism. His operas have not so far held the stage, except for Riders of the Sea is the only one that is performed regularly. His 9 symphonies range from the choral Sea Symphony, which uses Whitman's text, and the picturesque London Symphony, to the programmatic Antarctica. Symphonies 4, 5, 6, and 9 use a wide range of orchestral colors, as well as his large-scale choral works, such as Sancta Civitas. The basis of his work is melody, rhythm sometimes being clear and obvious, but his visionary quality is broad humanity, as heard in the ballet Job, and as well as the 5th and 9th symphonies. Its appeal at several levels make it a remarkable expression of the natural spirit in music, just as the man himself personified all that was best in the liberal 19th century tradition.
Yeah, that mask is wonderful. Job, it's beautiful. And Sancta Civitas, too. All these works. I mean, that's the thing about Vaughan Williams, is it's always just beautiful.
Yeah,
regardless of how genius one might think this composer is, he writes beautiful music.
Yeah. So his life, we're going to talk about 3 periods of his life. So we're going to start with his early years.
Sure. When he was very, very young, he did have a pretty average upper middle class education, very conventional. There was a lot of music education involved in this part of his life. He played violin in Charterhouse School Orchestra. He began to compose very, very young, at the age of 6. And he continued until the day he died. He never retired from composing. Just kept on going. In 1890, unconventionally, he went directly to the Royal College of Music as a composition student. He studied with Hubert Parry, a very important composer of England, of the English choral tradition, and of non-choral music too. But I think Parry is best known for these big works that you see at coronations and royal weddings still today. But this was a person that Vaughan Williams studied with. And so 2 years later, in 1982, he entered Trinity College in Cambridge. This is where he worked with a history, worked on a history degree for a bachelor's of music degree. The education system in England is comparable to ours in the U.S., but a little different. But he read, he did a lot of work studying, doing weekly lessons at the Royal College of Music, and studying composition with Charles Wood at Cambridge. Charles Wood being one of the big head honchos of the English choral music tradition. I mean, I do not go to very many Anglican services without hearing at least one Charles Wood piece every 2 or 3 services. He's just very important. In 1895, he re-entered the Royal College of Music as a pupil of Charles Villiers Stanford. Stanford is another big wig. So this is a guy who studies with a whole lot of people. Not only does he study with people, but he's friendly with people. He becomes friends with people like Gustav Holst, who is a very well-known composer and a very intellectual composer, worked really hard to try and do things that were unlike what other composers were doing. And so in 1897, after his marriage with Adeline Fischer, he went to Berlin, where he had lessons and encouragement from Max Bruch.
Which we talked about last podcast, because Respighi also studied with Bruch around the same time, right? Well, maybe a couple of years after Vaughan Williams.
But yeah, Vaughan Williams has got a pedigree, man. He studied with everybody.
Yeah, and we'll see more influence in a little bit. But, more to come. Spoiler alert, it's in France.
Well, it's okay.
His compositions at the turn of the century were mainly chamber music, but also he wrote some songs, including the really famous Linden Lee, of 1901, which I love. I really love that choir setting. Mm-hmm. He also edited the welcome songs from the Purcell Society. He wrote articles for periodicals and also contributed to the second edition in 1904 of Groove's Dictionary of Music and Musicians, which is still very much active today online, which is where we get a lot of our research actually these days. Also in 1904, his Songs of Travel, which are settings of R.L. Stevenson, were sung in London. A significant event in 1902 was his introduction by Lucy Broadwood to the systematic collecting of folk songs. Further motivation was given to this activity in December of 1903 when he heard Bushes and Briars, sung by an old shepherd in Essex. So he turned this song, the Bushes and Briars, into a tenor bass setting, TTBB setting, just male choir. During the next 9 years, he collected tunes in Norfolk, Hertfordshire, Surrey, and Sussex, publishing many of them in various arrangements. In 1904, he accepted an invitation to be music editor of a new hymn book called The English Hymnal, published in 1906.
And this stuff has lasted a long time. I mean, if like any Protestant hymnal, I mean, heck, I have a Methodist one right here. If you go to the back of this thing, you'll find Vaughan Williams' name and a bunch of hymns beside it. The guy wrote lots of music for the hymn, for the Christian musical tradition. We have that many.
That's a lot.
If I were to guesstimate, probably about 20 hymns in here, and the United Methodist hymnal are Vaughan Williams' work. So the guy did a lot in terms of Christian hymnody. He was one of the big champions of that in that period, for sure.
The second period. Well, we're gonna move to the second period, which is his mature years.
Sure. As a mature composer, he composed a little differently, though not too differently. I mean, we always want to separate things into periods, and Vaughan Williams is a little tougher to put into periods because his music is sort of it's Vaughan Williams. Even his early stuff is just as beautiful. Yeah. But his principal work around the turn of the century was a short choral setting of Walt Whitman called Toward the Unknown Region, which was written in 1905. And although this was a success at the 1907 Leeds Festival, he was dissatisfied with the composition. He's dissatisfied with most of what he had written. And so he went to Paris early in 1908 for 3 months of intensive study with Ravel.
Great.
This released a lot of his creative energies. He wanted to do new and interesting things. So he rapidly produced String Quartet No. 1 in G minor, 1908, the Houseman Song Cycle on Wenlock Edge, a really well-known work for tenor, piano, and string quartet, of which Gervais Elwes gave the first performance in 1909. And incidental music for the 1909 Cambridge Greek play The Wasps. In the same year, he completed a choral symphony on which he had been at work since 1903 as a C symphony, also to a Whitman text, Walt Whitman. It had enthusiastic reception at the 1910 Leeds Festival, and it established Vaughan Williams as in the front rank of English composers. These works are some of the things that just spring-forwarded him to fame. His Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis, for instance, is still one of his best-known pieces, was written in 1910, right here in this period.
For strings.
This is work for strings, no brass, no piano, nothing hard, just these nice, soft little instruments. Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis. This is still one of his best-known works. He followed this with 5 mystical songs, 1911, which I've sung in the chorus of this. It's fantastic work for choir, orchestra, and a soloist, a baritone soloist, or a low female soloist, I think, works with this as well. But this is where we get the tune, "Come my way, my truth, my life." I don't know the words, but beautiful, beautiful music. Stuff that you'd think would be folk music, but it isn't. He wrote it. He wrote a London symphony around this period as well. This work was performed in London, 1914, shortly thereafter. And so from 1910 to 14, he was also at work on a ballad opera set in Napoleonic days called Hugh the Drover. This was completed in August 1914. And after he finished that, he shelved it as a composer. Though in his 42nd year, he joined the army and spent most of his next 4 years in France.
Mm-hmm. In 1919, Vaughan Williams joined the staff of the Royal College of Music, like you said. Well, he actually joined the staff. And in 1921, he became conductor of the Bach Choir. His experience as a choral conductor dated mainly from 1905, when he had become conductor of the Leith Hill Festival in Dorking, near his family home. His Bach performances, highly personal but artistically compelling, were the festival's major attraction until 1958. From 1922, he produced ambitious and enterprising works in several genres. These include a pastoral symphony, written in 1922, the Mass in G minor from 1921, Flos Campi, a suite for solo viola, small chorus, and orchestra from 1925, the Oratorio Sancta Civitas from 1926, and a violin concerto written in 1925. Also Hugh the Drover from 1924, and the Falstaff opera Sir John in Love from 1921 were both produced in London. The ballet Masque for Dancing Job, based on William Blake's illustrations, was first performed as an orchestral work at Norwich in 1930 and reached the stage in London in 1931. The piano concerto was played by Harriet Cohen in London in 1933, and in 1935 his violent Fourth Symphony was introduced by Adrian Boult at the BBC concert in London. A few weeks later, he was appointed to the Order of Merit. So the Fourth Symphony is really interesting because it's very 20th century. There's a lot of dissonant and is nothing like the Fifth Symphony.
Sure. So the third period, we can call the final years. If we want to put Vaughan Williams into periods, he does have some degree of continuity.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 22 years of Vaughan Williams' life, he does not diminish any of his compositional work. He's always working. 5 more symphonies were written in this period.
Mm-hmm.
Number 5, which was in 1943, number 6 in 47, number 7, the Sinfonia Antarctica, 1952, an Antarctic symphony. What a thought. Number 8, the Symphony number 8 in 1955, and number 9 in 1957. So 5 symphonies were written in this period. He also wrote his first film score in 1940, which I've seen this film. He does really good work with it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of fun to watch a film with a film score written by such an important composer. Mm-hmm. He wrote his second string quartet in 1942 to 1944, thereabouts. He completed an opera, The Pilgrim's Progress, on which he had been working for many years. It premiered in Covent Garden in 1951. And he produced several choral works, notably Hodie, 1954, and many smaller pieces. So Vaughan Williams drew his inspiration from many sources. Not only did he draw from folk song, but he also drew from English 16th century music as well as French music around the turn of the 20th century, like of Ravel. Mm-hmm. You can hear all of these influences in his music.
Mm-hmm. So a lyrical melodic gift is at the heart of his works, but besides modality, there is a gritty harmonic toughness, such as occurs in Job and the Fourth Symphony, which places him firmly in the 20th century. His nationalist creed was that a composer must reach his fellow countrymen before he can hope to reach a universal audience. His symphonies, choral works, and songs are the core of his output, but the operas, particularly Riders of the Sea of 1937, contain fine music which overcomes the dramatic problems they pose. The nobility, integrity, and visionary qualities of the man are reflected in his music. And most of what we talked about to this point was written by Michael Kennedy in the Oxford Music Online. So we're going to move to his Fifth Symphony.
Sure. This is the work of the day. This is fun. So the commanding landmark in this period is his Fifth Symphony, mm-hmm. which he writes from 38 to 43, and he revises it near the end of his life in 1951. He wrote it after some sustained work on The Pilgrim's Progress, but apparently in the belief that the morality, he said that he he did not think that that Pilgrim's Progress would be completed in his lifetime. So he went ahead and finished this work. Three principal themes and some subsidiary material are therefore borrowed, but are treated independently with few, if any, programmatic overtones. Making its affirmations in spite of the Fourth Symphony, with which it is in common only in its mastery of means, the Fifth marks the climax of Vaughan Williams's traditional responses, his religious responses.
So, like the Pastoral Symphony, the Fifth has a number of associated works. These include the 5 variants of Dives and Lazarus of 1939 for strings and harps, which is perhaps the most personal of all the folk song compositions. The string quartet in A minor, written between 1942 and 1944, and also the Concerto for Oboe and Strings from 1944, which was written for Goossens. The concerto is at once capricious, lyrical, and nostalgic, and is the composer's most successful essay in the form. The A minor quartet ends in the spirit of the Fifth Symphony, but the other movements, which are either agitated or joyless, make the dominant impression in this fine work. Here, and in some of the music of the war film The Story of a Flemish Farm from 1943, are the first definite intimations of the ferment that was to produce the Sixth Symphony. Not that anyone could have foreseen the Sixth, still less the richness of the period that followed.
But his principal wartime composition was the Fifth Symphony. This work was something that could easily be seen as some kind of escapism from the war that was raging on at that time. Wilfrid Mellers wrote that, quote, "Music imbued with what one can only call greatness of soul," unquote, is what this symphony comprises. It first played in 1943, and a lot of people who heard it responded with a sense of deep gratitude. Even for people who did not know that Vaughan Williams was thinking about the war in particular, there was just something about the piece that suggested wartime thinking.
Yeah, especially there is a recording of the BBC proms in YouTube, which I will put a link to, and at the beginning they're talking about it, and they say that this work is like you said, escapism, because it's written during the time of war, so he's looking at England without conflict, in the middle of all this turmoil, and I love this piece as well. It was written between 1938 and 1943, like you said. The style represents a shift away from the violent dissonance of the Fourth Symphony and a return to the more romantic style of the earlier Pastoral Symphony. It is also noteworthy that this is the quietest symphony that he ever wrote.
The quietest.
With only a few passages written that even get to a forte. The texture throughout the work is strongly dominated by the strings, which I think gives it that warmth,
Well, a lot of the themes, a lot of the musical material from the Fifth Symphony is taken directly from the Pilgrim's Progress. I mean, he is not worried about borrowing from himself at all. This opera, or Vaughan Williams calls it a morality, this opera had been in gestation for decades, and the composer had temporarily abandoned it at about around the time the symphony was conceived. It's just one of those things that he'd always wanted to write. He had all these ideas in his head, and he finally put it down pretty late in life. So despite its origins, the symphony is without programmatic context, and it's in the form of an extended development of musical themes taken from the morality rather than an attempt to cast it directly into a symphonic form. He's not trying to put something into a cookie cutter, he's just trying to write music that develops on itself, a very romantic concept.
So a little bit about the background of this piece. When Vaughan Williams started writing his Fifth Symphony in 1938, he, like you said, he had been working on the Pilgrim's Progress for 30 years. And by the 1940s, he had appeared to have abandoned the work completely and decided to incorporate some of the ideas and themes into other works. Most notably, of course, is this symphony. In January of 1943, Vaughan Williams arranged for two of his friends play through the newly completed piano duet score of this symphony. In later years, his widow Ursula recalled that he was now impressed after he was not impressed after hearing it, causing him to doubt his new work. But after hearing the first orchestral rehearsal by the London Philharmonic on 25th of May of that same year, he changed his mind.
What a difference instruments make.
Of course.
Maybe they were just bad pianists. I mean, you can't deny it. I mean, it could have happened.
But the color is just not the same. The texture is so different.
Well, the music has to be intrinsically good. You're going to hide behind an orchestral color to make something good. No, I'm kidding. So Vaughan Williams dedicated his symphony here to Jean Sibelius, the great Finnish composer. At this time, this composer was very fashionable among British composers. Arnold Bax and William Walton had already written symphonies of Sibelian influence, if you will. Arnold Bax is a very well-known composer, and so is William Walton. I think Arnold Bax is probably a little underappreciated. I mean, you don't hear a whole lot of people talking about Mr. Bax, but I mean, I have taken evenings and just listened just on YouTube of all of these symphonies and all these works. And they're great, good music that no one ever listens to.
That's strange why nobody performs it.
It's fantastic stuff. I mean, his work. I know Bax more for his brother Clifford Bax, who was a theosophist. So that goes into my study into music and the occult.
Well.
He helped Holst with the translation of a theosophical text.
Cool.
But anyway, the description and the symphony originally read, dedicated without permission and with the sincerest flattery to Jean Sibelius, whose great example is worthy of all imitation, unquote. So when the work was published, it was shortened to read, dedicated without permission to Jean Sibelius, just shortened to those words. Sir Adrian Bolt subsequently secured permission. Sibelius wrote, I heard Dr. Ralph Vaughan Williams' new symphony in Stockholm under the excellent leadership of Malcolm Sargent. This symphony is a marvelous work. The dedication made me feel proud and grateful. I wonder if Dr. Williams has any idea of the pleasure he has given me, unquote. This is very sweet, very kind. Sibelius is sort of a fatherly figure in the turn of the century orchestral music.
The fifth symphony is structured in a fairly typically four-movement form. The first movement is titled Prelude, and the first movement lends itself to sonata form, but does not display all its characteristics. The second subject has been derived from the first subject. So let me stop really quick, and we're just gonna talk about sonata super quick.
Oh gosh. Anything but sonata form.
No, we'll do the Cliff Notes version, because I mean our people, the people that are listening to us that already know about music, we don't have to say it, but this is more for those that don't know much about music. So sonata form is a form that is used a lot in symphonies. Most of the major composers and major works use sonata form. Sonata form is basically, in the simplest sense, is you go away and you come back. That's the simplest form. But it does so harmonically. You go usually from one, which we call tonic, to a different key, be it 5 or 3 if you're in minor, which is dominant or whatever, and then you come back to 1. That's the easiest way to think about it. But in between you have 3 main sections, which are the exposition, the development, and the recapitulation. And these sections, like the first and the third section, have usually 2 themes with a transition in between. And then the development is where composers just go crazy and do all kinds of tricks and try to show off as much as they can. So this symphony, is there anything you want to say about sonata?
Well, I mean, the sonata form, the best way I've ever heard it put is just that it is, like you said, it's starting home, and then you realize there's a problem, so you have to depart home and go through some kind of transformation so that when you come back home, everything's back to normal. You're a master of both worlds. It's very much like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. All the best movies of the best stories of humanity have all been around the idea of starting out with some flaw, leaving home to be fixed in some way, and then come back. I mean, Star Wars does this.
Of course.
All kinds of fun things. The sonata does it with harmony. Sonata form does it with just the way the harmony is structured. Best way to put it.
Yeah, and something I forgot is just that the recap is always in the tonic, in 1.
It is home.
Yeah, it's home the whole way. So it opens, of course, there is always exceptions. composers go crazy with the thing. So there's,
including Vaughan Williams.
of course, there's always exceptions in music. You give them rules and they will break them. But it's usually more guidelines than anything else. So this symphony opens with a pedal C in the bass, answered by a horn call outlining a D major chord in a dotted rhythm, which implies Mixolydian D. The violins, however, use the notes of the pentatonic scale, which we've talked about before, making the key ambiguous. Wilfred Mellers believed this is why Vaughan Williams built the movement as a preludio, because it suggests an emergent state. The horn call motif fluctuates from major to minor, outlining the tonal ambiguity, moving between Mixolydian and Dorian modes, which becomes a characteristic of this movement. The bass's C pedal becomes the tonic when the key changes to either the Aeolian or Dorian modes.
So these are all fun words for modes. I mean, it's for people who are uninitiated into words like Mixolydian, Aeolian, Dorian, Ionian, all these fun words. All that means is it's a scale that starts in a different place. Like if you were just playing the white notes on a piano, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, da, 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 and you just move it over one, starting on D. Da, 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 whatever it is. I can't do it well. I can't sing modes very easily. It's Dorian. And so you start this scale anywhere else on the keyboard, and it all has its own name: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian.
And
it's a lot of fun.
Where do these weird, crazy names come from?
It comes from Greece.
Of course.
It comes from the. I mean, the modes used to be called that, but the church gave them assigned these names to them out of tradition. The people of Ionia and the people of the Doric people did not use the Dorian mode. These are just names that were added on later on. But yeah, so Vaughan Williams is a modal composer a lot more than many other composers are. So that's what we mean by Mixolydian and Dorian and all that stuff.
Yeah, they're just modes, basically.
Just modes. Just like Mixolydian just has a certain... It's happy, but it has a lowered 7th degree at the top. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do, te, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. It's kind of a fun little sound.
So this melody in this movement then moves to E with a new melody in the violins, which although does not include a sharpened 7th, it still outlines E major. The basses now play pizzicato, which supports the melody both melodically and harmonically, and the texture incorporates suspensions and passing notes, which makes the harmony richer. A sudden descent of a semitone, an idea previously used in Vaughan Williams' work Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis, and as well as Job, marks a key change to 3 flats and also the development section.
The tempo accelerates to allegro for the development. It's a little faster. The strings are used to imply the winds of nature in a similar vein to that of Sibelius. This is punctuated by the brass and the woodwinds with the falling semitone motif, which gets larger intervallically into a major second and a minor third. This section is a canon, or the polyphony of which Mellers believes shows the randomness of nature. So the key shifts down medians until it reaches D minor, when the strings imitate Sibelius again, this time using tremolo effects.
And a canon, really quickly, is basically a melody that is basically 2 melodies that are exactly the same but are displaced.
Yeah, so row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, and then someone else comes in with the same exact thing, and the way they play against each other is the genius of the melody.
For the recapitulation, the tempo slows and the dynamics are reduced once again. The C pedal is reintroduced, but this time in a more melodic fashion. There is a more development in the recapitulation. There's more development in the recapitulation. The movement ends in a similar way to the opening, which with the horn call, but the key signature of 2 flats rather than 1 sharp is used. The basses descend to C via E flat, leaving the tonality of the movement still in question.
And several of the musical themes in this movement are used in Pilgrim's Progress, in Act 1, Scene 1 of the work, particularly the opening dialogue between Pilgrim and Evangelist. A Dresden Amen theme appears towards the close of this movement. Arnold Whittall argues that, quote, with respect to D major, the preludio might be regarded as a clear case of Schoenbergian schwebende Tonalität, or fluctuating, suspended, not yet decided tonality. Sort of in and out of something recognizably in a key.
The next movement, which is a scherzo, which we see in classical symphonies, especially after Beethoven. Scherzo is it translates to a joke, but it's usually a very happy kind of movement.
It's not that funny, is it?
So Vaughan Williams utilizes rhythm in the scherzo to convey different effects. The focus of the movement is centered on the rhythm rather than the ambiguous tonality of the preludio. Lionel Pike points out that at times it seems more like a counterpoint of rhythms than of pitches. The movement begins with 3 dotted half notes in a fast 3/4 time, then half notes for four bars, which create hemiolas.
1 and a 2 and a 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and a 2 and it's just that little, just something where you have if you're in a triple time if you're in a large triple time, a short triple time, then a large duple time. Oh, it's really complicated. See, I thought hemiola was just where you take meat and you put it in into a pasta, and then you close the pasta around it and then put a meat sauce over it. But that's apparently ravioli. But no, hemiola is it's weird, but it's just a rhythmic. It's a way of confusing the rhythm a little bit, giving it a little interest.
Yeah. So this gives the illusion that the music is accelerating, and so the pulse does not settle. When the melodic line begins, the music is divided into 5-bar phrases. A sense of stability is established when the theme is repeated by the viola and double bass in stable 2-bar phrases. However, the violins enter with a phrasing that does not conform to either pattern, thus adding more confusion. Using this rhythmic phrasing, the Dorian line is played on the violins, and the Aeolian woodwind line are differentiated rhythmically, as well as tonally. The rhythmical confusion is halted when the wind and strings alternate downward runs antiphonally.
So, a lot of good musical jargon here. But it's hard to talk about music without having some kind of language to describe it. So the next movement is Romanza. Let me give it these nice Italian names. It's romance. The primary theme here in this movement, the primary themes are mainly from the opening of Act 1, Scene 2 of Pilgrim's Progress, The House Beautiful, is what this borrows from. So the opening English horn solo is taken virtually without change. The Pilgrim's lyric sung to this melody, "He hath given me rest by his sorrow and life by his death," was originally used by Vaughan Williams as an inscription on this movement, while the contrasting agitated theme of the central section is taken from Pilgrim's lyric, save me, Lord, my burden is greater than I can bear." So rising fourths again appear as a connecting agent among passages. The movement might well be considered the spiritual core of the symphony.
Yeah. This movement begins with an English horn solo, and English horn is kind of like an oboe, but it's larger, and its sound is darker than an oboe. You know, we always make fun of oboes because they have this strident sound.
Yeah. So you get to enjoy that strident sound in a deeper register.
A deeper, right?
So you enjoy the horrible nasal oboe. You can move it down to a lower end.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
All it is.
It sounds dark. It sounds better with the English horn, though.
It does, doesn't it?
I hope we don't have any oboes.
I feel the same way about every instrument family. Don't worry, the lower the better, no matter what.
That's true. Of course, we're bassists.
I mean, you play a violin. This is really a natural thing. You have to hold weird, and it's so high, and just breaking your eardrum on one side of your head. And it's just horrible. Whereas the cello is this big natural thing that you can just hold and relax and play. And every time, every situation, the lower instrument will be the more pleasurable.
Sure.
I'll say it.
I'm with you, dude. We are both bassists. I'm okay with that. Even though I play piccolo, so that's crazy.
Well, just gotta invest in a good pair of musician's earplugs.
True.
And you will be just fine on Pickle.
Yes, for sure. So the last movement, which is a Passacaglia, which is this is a great term because he's looking back. Just in this term, you know that he's looking back somehow.
People don't use Passacaglia so much anymore.
Yeah. So that was like in Bach times, in the Baroque, we have a lot of Passacaglias and stuff like that. And basically, what it is just a bass ostinato, like we've said before. Ostinato is just a repeated figure.
And just repeat the bass line, and it can be a very long bass line. Da 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 da. Could go over and over again. Though that's not necessarily the Passacaglia that I just sang. That's famous, but it's a well-known bass ostinato. Same idea.
And so, although this movement begins with the repetitive bass line characteristic of the Passacaglia form, like we just said, Vaughan Williams eventually abandons it. The triumphant primary melody of the Passacaglia is used as Pilgrim's dialogue with interpreted in the second half of the House Beautiful scene, while the fanfare motif recalls of the arming of the pilgrim in Act 2, Scene 1. This ushers in a return of the themes from the first movement of the symphony, which are resolved into a quiet farewell, played by the woodwinds and then by the upper strings. At the end of the fourth movement, a reference to Vaughan Williams' hymn, Sine Nomine.
I think that's how he probably would have pronounced it.
Sine Nomine.
Sine Nomine. Sine Nomine, without a name. It's like untitled.
Yeah, so he quotes himself there in a hymn at the end.
He says, Sine Nomine is for all the saints who from their labors rest.
So the ending of this piece is incredible. It's incredible because it's seriously like we heard on the YouTube videos, is absence of problems. It's just completely free of any problems. This is one of my favorite symphonies of all time.
It's pretty.
It's especially because of that. It's escapism, and you're lost in this wonderful world, trying to escape from the realities of life, I guess. Anything else?
That's all I got.
All right, cool. So if you want to email us, if you want to send us any questions, or you have any concerns or anything, just write us to symphonicpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us in YouTube just by searching the Symphonic Podcast. We have a playlist going now, 5 episodes with this one included, and we're also on iTunes. That's it for now.
Yeah, and if you're a listener and want to watch, you can play a bar game, and how many times I scratch my nose in the course of a podcast.
Me too.
It's fun to do. But yeah, we have all kinds of fun features in the YouTube version of this too.
Mm-hmm. So Andrew,
yes.
Just tell me, have you been listening to anything lately that we can tell our audience? Maybe they'll listen to some of the things we're listening to.
Sure, why not? So what I've been listening to this week, a lot more than I have listened to much anything else, is Lully's Requiem, Lully, his Requiem, the guy that died by piercing his foot while conducting. Really sad story, but yeah, his Requiem is just a wonderful example of not only good choral music but good symphonic. I mean, it's good string writing too. Just nice, thick, and resilient Baroque French music. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it a good bit. Mm-hmm. It's really nice. How about you?
I've been listening to, for the first time, I've never listened to this piece, but I listened about 3 days ago for the first time. I listened to Gershwin's first piano concerto, and I've been listening to it on repeat lately because I really, really like it. I mean, it's jazz, it's so jazzy, of course, it's Gershwin, it's very jazzy, and the first movement especially I really like, especially around the middle of the first movement. He goes into a lyrical section and then he comes back with the main theme, and it's such a incredible contrast. I love it. I really, really like it. So that's our suggestions for now.
Sure, sounds good. I need to listen. I've never heard the Gershwin concerto myself.
Pretty cool. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, sir.